this is where they've lived and this is where their family has lived for generations and settled it in fifth, sixth generation, and now he's got to move.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah, it is. There's no place like home at the end
Right.
of the day. And for somebody that has grown up on the land and invested everything, his whole being into that community and the land that he operates on, it's a terribly sad thing. So, welcome back to the Agriculture Podcast. We're here at FarmCon again today, and we're joined by Rupert Williams, who I just met last night. He's definitely a character. You're going to enjoy him. His website or his business name is Go Farm Yourself. Basically, what it is a data-driven AI recommendation market service. Is that correct, Rupert?
Yeah, that's pretty close. First, let me start with a disclaimer. I know that's not sexy, but just get it out of the way for the lawyers. Futures and options offer unlimited risk. Doing anything I say or do. This is Rupert Williams talking from Go Farm Yourself. You are likely to lose all your money and then some. These are not trading recommendations. All trades are hypothetical. So if you go to our website or listen to this either live or via recording, you are accepting the brain damage that could potentially come with it. And we believe in personal accountability at Go Farm Yourself, so make your own decisions.
That's right. So don't listen to anything we have to say today, but listen in, please.
Yeah, we'll have fun with it. So thanks for having me, Neil. I love your accent, by the way, like Rupert. That's a Southern way to say it. I appreciate that. My mom is a Dutch immigrant and she decided, you know what? I'm not going to name my kid something normal. I'm going to punish him for most of his life. We're going to name him something unique. And so she named me after an obscure English prince. And my middle name's Andrew, but she was afraid everybody would call me Andy when we came to the States. And that probably would have been true, but having a name like Rupert, you got made fun of your whole life. But now I love it because I'm the only Rupert most people have ever met. So, your perspective changes when you're 10 on the playground, and now I'm 45, and it's kind of fun. People remember it.
Yeah, that's right. And if you ever meet Rupert, you're probably not going to forget him. So, what are we going to talk about today, Rupert?
So, I don't know the nature of your podcast. I mean, kind of what we talked about last night about our product is kind of fun. Basically, markets have changed, right? The markets we have today are not even the markets we had 3 years ago. And this is no disrespect to Grandpa or any Grandpa listening. The world has changed. Information travels so fast and at such a high frequency. Markets have fundamentally changed from what they used to be. So a little bit of background about me, and before you get mad, just listen and hear my story, please. I'm a former Chicago Board of Trade floor options market maker. So I was the guy in the pit taking most of the other side of a lot of these trades. So if you trade with your elevator or you trade with the board or you trade with whatever, they're usually doing an offset and they would come to the pit to do that. I started down the Chicago Mercantile Exchange in 2001. I moved over to commodities in 2004 during that big ethanol boom and kind of stayed in commodities ever since. And one of the things I like about commodities in general is they're real markets, right? What's the price of Tesla or Nvidia or whatever? Who knows? It's just whatever somebody's willing to pay next for it. But with commodities, you have a supply component and you have a demand component. And those two things should work to balance. Those are the levers in the market that are real, that somebody that buys this product from a farmer is going to use it to do something with it. And then that's going to go to some other product. And just that realness of the market is something I always enjoyed. And it makes for some really exciting years and some really boring years, just depending on what's going on. And obviously the last couple of years post-COVID, we've had this boom in commodities. And one of the reasons for that is we've disrupted the global supply chain, right? I mean, whatever you believe about COVID policies, maybe the first lockdown for 10 days till they figured out what was going on, fine. I mean, I was still mad about it because I don't like to be told to go in the house at 7 p.m. I don't know why COVID only comes out after 7 p.m. I can go to the hardware store or the grocery store all day during the day, but at 7 p.m., you got to go in your house. Well, I'm a 45-year-old stay-at-home dad, no kids, single guy. Like, I don't like staying in my house. And So, but post that, you've had this craziness in markets, and that's exciting, right? Volatility is scary, with prices going up and down, but volatility is actually the producer's best friend, because without volatility, you can't get those big spikes to the upside that you need to sell into, right?
Sure.
If we have a quiet, boring market, nothing's happening, and we just sit here until the market moves slowly. Well, that's nice because you don't have to pay attention to it too much, but then you don't have that opportunity for that big upward move in prices. Now, any big upward move in prices can also have a big downward move. And so as a trader, when I first got down there, we used pieces of paper, right? And you had to flip sheets and you had to keep track of everything that was going on and all these things. And it was perfect for a guy like me that likes to do 10 things at once. However, over time, then they got these tablets, these handhelds. And so the guys that use sheets or paper had to adapt because it was all about speed in the pit. If you made the first market and you could set a quantity to it and the broker had less than that, you could take them all. Or you take your quantity and then they split up the rest. Well, speed was everything, speed and accuracy. Now, tablets, guys could just look at it, and then they started streaming them so they'd update in real time. So you didn't have to flip pages, so they started getting faster. Well, technology leveled the playing field between the good traders and the bad traders, made the good traders worse and the bad traders better. Then eventually it became so advanced that they would update it from upstairs. So you didn't even have to know anything about risk or volatility or delta or gamma or whatever. You literally just took, we called them box monkeys. You literally just took a stylus or a little pen and you marked the two things and it would pop up the value. If I know the value, it's 24 and I didn't need to do the math, 38 minus 14, you could just go 22, 26 and you're already there. So over time, the computers got so good that then they would update themselves. Okay, well, then what do you need people for? So they closed the floor. I left the floor in 2013. They announced the closing of it at the end of that year, and so they were going to close it in summer of 2015. This was always kind of their goal, save a bunch of money, turn the Board of Trade into a laser tag facility or a museum or whatever. And, all the support staff and janitors and all the people that ran, help make a trade happen disappeared. And so it's a really sad thing. It's never coming back, unfortunately. I would like to go back to that world. I actually saw a guy in the lobby that was one of the brokers, and I haven't seen him in a decade. And we started laughing and telling stories about the pit and all the funny things that used to happen and how we used to sit there when Tom Skilling would come on WGN at noon. The whole floor, we're talking 25,000 people, would go silent, and they'd turn up all the TVs around the pit, and we'd listen to his weather report. Then, sure enough, when he went to commercial, phones start ringing. And that's how it used to work. So, now it's just, it goes up, it goes down, it goes all around. The intraday volatility, in my opinion, is way higher, right? The Tuesday after Christmas last year in 22, soybeans were up 40 cents on South America dryness. An hour later, they're lower on the day, and then they closed 3 higher. Well, you didn't need to move 80 cents. Think about that, 80 cents. If you're a 50 bushel soybean producer, that's $40 an acre, just for easy figuring. $40 an acre in an hour. Well, that provides opportunity, but that also makes it much harder to make decisions, okay? First hour, we're up 40 cents. I'm not going to sell. Might go limit up. Okay, well, then an hour later, let's wait another hour. Maybe it's up 80 cents. Well, an hour later, it's lower on the day. You missed that opportunity, and that might have been your opportunity to sell. And so that's why, like target orders, other things. My whole treatise on grade marketing is, I hear this from producers all the time, is it's scary, right? How do I make a decision? What price is too high? And in the era of high frequency trading or robot trading, who knows, right? Like, the price means nothing to the computer. And that's good and bad. So before people get mad and say, well, this is unfair and this and that, it's the same move that would have happened when I was on the floor. The difference between that 40-cent up and down move in an hour, that would have taken a week or two, right? It would have taken us a week to go up 40 cents. And then maybe there was a day, 6 days later that we went down 40 cents because something changed. But it didn't happen in an hour because humans don't move that fast. And nothing, if you think about it, nothing really fundamentally changes in an hour in commodities. I always laugh at the cattle market or hogs. They'll be $3 lower on the open and then unchanged and then higher on the day. Well, nothing, if you grow pigs or feed cattle. Nothing changed in that industry
Right.
in 20 minutes.
It's just the nature of the beast, I guess. Just the nature of the markets playing out.
Yeah, it's excuse me, I'm talking for someone. My needed some water. Yeah, no, I think what I'm trying to get people to understand is the thing I hear more and more. Right, the farmers become so good at growing, right, and that's good and bad, right. So now everybody, most people have auto steer, most people have singulation, most people have precision plant, whatever. All these advanced tools, and that's why trendline yield is a real thing. Well, that means that you can only outgrow so much of this, right? So if you want to grow as a farm, one of the reasons we did go farm yourself, to kind of give some of my background, as I've watched these markets evolve, right? I wanted to one, help myself and then help as many people as possible. I did, I traded off my own. I either traded a proprietary account or my own account, which means we had no customers, right? We traded capital. You make money or lose money. If you lose money, you're fired. So I've traded these products my whole life without ever growing them,
Right.
right? And my job was to keep the market liquid, right? Same thing as a ticket scalper at Wrigley. You get off the train, you need a ticket. There's a bunch of people standing around that are buying tickets from people that don't want them, or somebody didn't show up, or they need beer money, and they're trying to sell them to somebody last minute that want them. Well, as the game goes by, that value decays, right? That's what an option is.
Sure.
And options are really scary, and a lot of people lose money in them because they don't understand the components that go into them. So one of the things we try to do at Go Farm Yourself is educate people, right? That's one of the purposes of it. The other thing was, okay, well, I'll start working with producers and see how we can just help people, right? Like if you have the product, there are tools available to you, throughout the industry, and your job is to educate yourself. And here's why: there is no more arable land in the United States, right? Sure, South America's got plenty, and they can burn down an entire rainforest. But if you are going to grow or survive or pass down the opportunity you have to your kids, you're going to have to grow. So if you have, I tell this story all the time about Agent 42 of our product, Central Iowa farmer, 900 acres owned, 1,800 acres total. They custom feed hogs for some big outfit, and they do everything they can to support 3 families. Well, the last couple of years they've done pretty well. This year margins are way tighter. Okay, so if the dad is going to retire at some point, and then it's passed to the 2 kids, now they each have 450. Well, they both have 2 kids, so then now they each have 225. So in 40 or 50 years, you're going to have to keep growing if you want to support those families. Like one of the things about the 70s, I always hear, and I was actually talking to an older farmer at the bar who I really respect. He said, when I was farming in 1979, I could support my whole family on 1 quarter, right? Now you can't do that.
Right.
And so that's the nature of the beast and how it's changed. And one of the things with low interest rates, and I'm kind of glad we have interest rates again, is you're pushing some of that outside money out of farm ground. So then it has a chance to go back into the producer's hands, right? And back to this Central Iowa guy, they were going to buy this back 80 that backs up to their hog barn. They can pipe the manure across the field and not have to truck it 4 miles because they lose a bunch of money in trucking because it's really heavy. And now they could just pipe it. So they dropped out of that land at 14.5. And this is a few years ago, but still, recently with the higher prices. And this guy turned around and looked at him, and he's, 35, 36-year-old producer. He said, I thought the guy was going to stare a hole through my soul. And I said, well, did he get it? He goes, yeah, for like 16.8. And I was like, wow. And I said, well, is he a big farmer in your area? He goes, no. He founded a real estate company and he's a billionaire. And I said, what's he buying farm ground for? And he's like, I don't know. He just does. And I said, when do you think that land will come back up for sale? And he said the saddest thing that I've ever heard, getting to know producers, was not in my lifetime. And we heard that yesterday at the conference. Kevin Van Trump said, you might get 1 or 2 chances to purchase a piece of ground in your lifetime.
Yeah.
And that's the harsh reality of farming. Yeah, I love the community aspect of rural America, but really believe, and this is why we are corporate sponsors of American Soybean Association and National Corn Growers as a company, which is not cheap, because I believe some of these things get done in policy in Washington, and their goal is to protect the family farm.
Sure.
And if we don't protect the family farm, like I used to live in Chicago for 20 years, right? And I've seen that city go from amazing to trash.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because of bad public policy and politics and all these other things. And, you know, the disconnect between cities and rural. So when they closed the floor, I started going out to visit producers. I was like, I got to learn more about what I'm trading. I don't even know what this stuff is. I just know it's numbers and we use it for all these things and whatever. And I went out and visited this farmer outside of Chicago, about 60 miles west. And I said, that's some good looking corn. And I said, I bet this is better fresh off the cob. And he's like, yeah, take a bite. So here I am. So I grab, naive me, had never done this before. I'd met him at a top producer conference, and I take the ear of corn and I take a bite out of it and I spit it out. I was like, that's not very good. I hate to break it to you, guy, but that doesn't taste like the stuff I get in the grocery store. And he goes, that's because it's different. And I was like, oh. And so that's when I learned the difference between, field corn and sweet corn.
Sure.
It looks the same to me.
Yeah.
How would I know?
Right.
And so I started filming a lot of this stuff because it was fascinating to me to go, pull a calf and do this and try to, get my cattle merit badge and feed cattle and run a bulldozer. I mean, it's a payloader, but as a kid, I always thought it was called a bulldozer.
Right.
But there's actually they're very different things and do very, if it has a bucket on it, it's got to be a bulldozer. And he's like, no, that's a payloader. And, feeding cattle and going around rural America, I made over 350 stops at individual farms in the United States over the last 10 years. And it's one of my favorite things to do. I would start leaving the city, go to a town, stay with some people that I met on the internet, which sounds weird. But the hospitality and the friendliness and just the Midwest, right? I grew up on the coast. My dad was in the U.S. Navy. I moved 7 times before I was 11. And so I never really had a home. I went to college in Texas and then moved to Chicago. I didn't know anything about rural America. Except once I started going to these small towns in Nebraska and we walk into a bar and everybody turns and looks at me like, who's that guy? Like, you don't ever have strangers come in here? And so I started talking to him. And he goes, this is my friend from Chicago. And they're like, what? And I said, yeah, I trade in the live cattle pit. And the bartender looks up and he's probably 89 years old. He's got his glasses halfway down and he looks up from the paper and I ordered a drink and he gave me something completely opposite. So it's just whatever he wants to give you. And it was like $2. And we sat there and talked to the whole group. And I asked one older gentleman, this is a town of 150 people. I have one bar and people drive to this bar because it's just a good community. And I was talking with him and I said, so, if they're like, this town is dying. And I said, why is that? He goes, no, none of the kids want to come back. And I said, why not? He said, there's no opportunity for them. And me having always lived in the suburbs or a city, like I live downtown Chicago. Like I never even thought about there's no opportunity. And I said, so, what are you going to do when you get older? And he was late 70s and he's going to have to move somewhere else. He said, I'm going to have to move to another town. And I said, how long have you lived here? And he said, my whole life. And I started to get tears thinking about that this gentleman has lived there for 77 years, born there, lived there, worked in the town, for farmers, and this is his home.
Right.
And now just because the town is eroding because you've got all this big corporate farming and all this other stuff and this consolidation in agriculture that he's got to move.
Yeah.
And I, having moved so much in my life, then living in Chicago for 20 years, it felt like home. When I'd come back to the city and I'd see the skyline, I'm like, that's my home.
Right.
And so for other people that this is where they've lived and this is where their family has lived for generations and settled it in 5th, 6th generation, and now he's got to move.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah, it is. So there's no place like home at the end of the day. And for somebody that has grown up on the land and invested everything, his whole being into that community and the land that he operates on, it's a terribly sad thing.
So that's where kind of like the stirring in my soul started. It was like, how do you keep this together? And my big belief is you got to keep the family farm together. You know, we've got to do this better and think of our farming like a business,
Sure.
right? That you got to make a margin, right? You planted your most expensive crop last year of all time. So it's maximum risk and maximum volatility. And last summer, and we've been hearing this a lot, we have about 600 agents. So an agent is a subscriber to our product because we're starting a movement. I'm agent 0. And then everybody that climbs up from there, agent 1, 2, so on
Right.
and so forth. And our trading robot, Ginger, who I haven't talked about yet, is agent 007. And so what she does, so she is a trading robot. So it's called an algorithm. Okay. And most of the trade, 90% of the trade now in Chicago is robots. So the markets move till you find end users or producers or people that actually humans want to do something. And since computers never sit still or take a minute off, they're constantly calculating and moving the market. Okay, fine. Well, we did the same thing on the floor. We just did it way slower. We'd get bored and we'd start betting on horses at the racetrack, right? Or we'd, do food challenges. Like somebody's like, I can eat, 60 chicken nuggets in 6 minutes. And we put it up on the board and start betting on it. And we'd get distracted and bored or, as a Cubs fan, there was nothing to talk about baseball, except there's always next year. But we could argue about football for a while, but if it wasn't football season, trading required effort.
Sure.
You had to raise your hands, you had to scream and yell, you had to sweat, elbow people. It was just a fist fight.
Right.
And now there's no friction. You can literally just click a button and a trade happens. And so because of that, that access has changed the way the markets work. And so what our robot does, and we named it Ginger. And the reason we named it Ginger is so we have several algorithms. We have Karen, Steve, Dick, and because
Karen.
I can't keep track of them. So that was actually the first one. And it's funny. So my co-founder, Jefferson, okay, so he's head of data at a $1.3 billion startup in Chicago. And what they do is they read rewards, take receipts, you upload them into an app, and then they read that data. They know everything about you, and then they sell it back to big brands. And he comes to me, and bless his heart, he goes, I can't do this anymore. It's soul sucking. And I said, well, you're a wage slave. You exchange your time for money. And when you have enough money, you buy all your time back. That's the way the world works, kid.
Right.
So I said, well, I got this idea. Can you do that same thing with the market? And then we sell it to farmers so they can make better decisions. He's like, I love this idea. You mean like the tractors and stuff? Like it's every kid's dream,
Right.
what farmers do. One of my favorite things about going on farm is seeing the sheer size of the equipment, right? It takes your breath away. You're like, what is that thing? Look at the tires on that. It could drive over a car. Well, that's a super sprayer. And everyone corrects me and says it's a sprayer. I'm like, no, it's a super sprayer. I mean, look how big that thing is. I can get a hose out in a garden and spray some flowers or weeds, with the little thing on the sidewalk and whatever. Or you could drive this gigantic thing and spray football fields at a time. Yeah. The idea of farming and the lifestyle and the family, what a great thing, but what a tough business.
It is. It's a difficult business, and but we share the same goals, and we want to see our rural communities succeed for the future. We don't want to see those rural communities go away.
Yeah, there's no reason for them to.
There's not. I mean, we have a vibrant, intelligent agriculture community with people that have learned finance and business. One of our own problems, I think, as farmers, is we get so emotionally invested in the grain that we've grown that it's very tough for us to feel good about a sale when we know the sale is either going to break even for us or be below the cost of production. And even though if you look at it and you know more than likely that grain market is headed down, it's very difficult for us to let go of that bushel of grain, even though it's detrimental to our operation in the long run. And so we see value in Rupert's business because his business takes some of the emotion away from that sale that you need to make sure that your farm is there for the next generation. Talk about that a little bit.
So that's a great lead into Ginger, and like any true redhead, she teaches you some things you shouldn't know, and then she loves you till she hates you till she loves you again because she's soulless, just like the market. And so we built this, and one of the things about it that I built it for me was I get so emotional trading. I mean, trading used to be an emotional thing. One of the things I was really good at in the pit was I could feel the emotion of the room. I'm an empath, like I could feel everything. Everything that everyone's doing, and the market had a feel to it. Now it's emotionless. It doesn't care. It doesn't care about you. It doesn't care about anybody that's making a trade or speculators or whatever, right? It just moves. And your comment about emotion and why I'm qualified to talk about this, I'll tell you a quick story. So the floor closes in 20. I leave the floor, and then 2014 was the last day of night trading. So I wanted to join these guys who I'd met on the internet, never actually met them in person, and they lived in Wisner, Nebraska. And they said, well, open invitation. So it's on the last day, or the day before the last day, whatever, Wednesday or Thursday, floor closes. I buy a flight out of Chicago, fly to Omaha, rent a car, show up in this town. I go to the local bar. It's called Rumors at the time. And I walk in, and it's like the music stops. And I was like, who's this guy? And I was like, hey, is so-and-so here? And they looked at me like, who's asking? And I was like, well, he invited me. I know him. He said he'd be here. Is this other person here? And now they're like, you don't walk into a small town bar and start asking questions about where people are at, especially when they have no idea who you are. And I was like, no, I don't have their phone numbers. But they told me to meet him here. So finally, somebody's like, well, that's my cousin. They're in Jack's office. I was like, who's Jack? And they're like, I'll call him. So they call, and they come running across the street. Can't believe I'm there. And apparently his office was across the street. And if I was in the town, I would have known that. So we all start talking. Then like 10 people show up, and we sit around and talk all night about the cattle business. And I said, hey, I got to be back home at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. And they're like, you're not going home. You gotta see a feedlot. And the funniest thing about this was it was the summer. It was like August, I think. And I get to the town, and I'm like, man, this place smells terrible. And they're like, that's the smell of money, Rupert. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. So we end up staying out way too late. Next morning, get up, and we go to the feedlot. And I got to see a feedlot for the first time. I'm like, this is how steaks are made? I just go into the grocery store and buy one, just buy what I want. I don't know how it gets there. Right. I don't know all these other things about it. And so I didn't end up going home at 7 a.m. And then we went to the guy's office, and they're like, just move your flight. You need to go to a Nebraska football game. And I was like, well, okay. I've always heard that's an experience. So I was supposed to be there 18 hours. I stayed 3 days, and my wife finally texted me and goes, where are you? I was like, I'm still in Nebraska. I'll be back on Monday. And so I spent those 3 days, and before I'd known it, I'd left a check to feed some cattle. Well, of course, the first one's free. And it's one of those things where if you sit down at the poker table and in 5 minutes you can't tell who the sucker is, you're the sucker. Now, none of them robbed me. That pen made money. But then all these people slide into my DMs on Twitter, and they're like, hey, I can help you out. Don't buy those expensive northern ones. We got these cheap ones in Texas. And I was like, why are they so cheap? They're all worth the same dead. And I'm like, am I the only one that can do math? So I don't do anything halfway. I either do it or I don't. And so I started feeding some cattle down there. And then a certain large bank was like, yeah, we'll give you $1 million against your assets to feed cattle. So I started feeding more cattle. And to me, it was just a simple math problem.
Right.
Where are they coming from? How long is the freight? Send them to whatever feed yard around the country. So I started driving around to all these feed yards, visiting my cattle, and it was just a cool thing. It was like, those are my steaks. I'm helping feed America. And I got a little bit sense of pride, and I take pictures, put it all over the internet. All my city friends are like, what on earth are you doing? But they were fascinated with it because none of us have ever had a chance to see this. If you didn't grow up in rural America, you have no idea how any of this works.
Right.
And I think that's one of the big disconnects between city and rural, and the big misunderstanding in our culture right now is like, oh no, everything should be this way. Well, you don't know how the rest of the world works, and then everybody makes fun of it and calls them the flyover states and all this stuff. Like, it doesn't matter, but it does. That's what knits America together.
Yeah.
Right? That's the fabric of our culture. You break that down, who knows where we'll end up.
This is the greatest thing about this. We call this podcast the Agriculture Podcast. And one of the things we're wanting to do is bridge the gap between the consumer and the producer. And it's great to have somebody like Rupert on here who has been in the business on the marketing, trading side, but has also been on the production side of agriculture. That's an interesting perspective because most people are producers and they do market their crop or their product that they're producing, but they don't actually get to perform the trades. And most of them have visited cities, but they've never lived in cities, so they don't see the perspective of the urban buyer.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, and I'll get into that in a minute. I actually could talk about that for hours. I knew this would happen. I enjoyed talking with you so much yesterday. The nice thing, the feed yards were so nice to me. They're like, well, and this was 2014. The cattle market was like this year, just supersonic. Everything you did turned to gold. So I'm like, I just need more. I just need more. I just need more. And then the feed yards were so nice to me. They're like, we'll buy some more cattle for you against the cattle you've already put money down for. I'm like, wait, I don't have to tell my wife about this? Let's go. They're all hedged on the board. What could possibly go wrong, right? The basis is +8. I'm hedging them here. They're about break even. And if I'm buying a put and selling an upside call, and if it fits in that window, I'm going to make money.
Sure.
Otherwise, I break even, unless they all die. And I met a lot of these feed yards and learned some of the differences between them and performance. And so I felt pretty confident about it. And then October of 2015 happens. And the feed yard manager calls me, and this is my biggest pen ever. And he calls me and he says, hey, Rupert, we got a problem. We got a bid, but it's with 3 weeks time, and the cattle are ready to go. They performed exactly like we said, 140 days, we got to ship them. I said, what's the bid? He said 118, 3 weeks time. Now the board's 136. So that's 18 back. And I said, these are not Holsteins. I am not selling them for that price. I'll go to the steakhouse in Chicago tonight and eat every steak in this town, and I will make the commercial disappearance happen myself. I got upset about it. And I said, well, don't sell them. And this is the moment I knew I was dead. I said, when do you think they'll be back? And he said, hopefully next week. And I said, Brent, hope is not a trading strategy where I come from. And sure enough, 3 weeks went by.
Yeah.
Nothing. He goes, hey, we got a bid. I really think we should ship them. I'm like, ship them. What's the bid? He goes, 118, 3 weeks time. Like, wait, we just waited 3 weeks, and nobody told me if you feed cattle once they're already fat, they're not going to grow.
Right.
So I'm just running the daycare at this point, and the board had only converged $2. So I made $4 back on basis, but I fed them 6 weeks too long, and so net, I vaporized my entire net worth. And why I share that story is if you want to make $1 million in the cattle business, start with $5 million, because that's all you're going to have left. But old anecdote, the thing about it is, like, that's when I first became emotional about trading.
Sure.
Right? I trade all the time, buy and sell, lose money left and right. I'm good at losing money.
Yeah.
But when you produce it, and I didn't even produce it. I just had an investment in it, and I got emotional about it.
Yeah.
And so I made the pain so much worse.
Yeah.
And so that's how I felt that pain of producers and started to understand what you mean by when you sell something, the hope. There's two things that happen. One, you always feel like you should get more because you did all the work.
Yeah.
That part makes perfect sense to me. The other thing, though, is even if you sell at a profit when the market's going up, you go, oh, well, what if it goes higher, right? So it's that fear and greed balance. And in the last couple of years, we had 750 corn.
Yeah.
Before planters rolled. And I was screaming at everybody, sell it all.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, what if it goes higher? I'm like, well, what if it doesn't? And that's the nature of the beast, right?
It is.
And then last year, which I thought was one of the most difficult years to not only trade grain, but market grain, is you had 6 days total in the whole year to sell over $6.
Yeah.
And we were down at 480, early, and then it didn't rain in central Illinois for months. And that's a lot like 2012. In 2012, we went supersonic.
Yeah.
And given where our carryout is and everything else, the quick and dirty on that is who knows what price corn had to go to ration demand, right? That's the beauty of that supply and demand thing we talked about earlier. Well, we go up to $6. Everybody's all excited again. And one of our agents calls me and he goes, what do you think I should do? I said, well, I'm not giving you any advice, obviously, but if it was me, what were you feeling when we were at 480 and your break even's 550? He goes, I didn't feel very good. I said, well, so you probably should get these sales off and take advantage of this opportunity. And then he ended, I was like, this is not a train wreck. Listen to anything I said, you're going to lose all your money. And he ended up doing that. And Ginger, our trading robot, sold $5.97. She didn't get that $6 sale. But then on the Monday before crop conditions came out, the worst in 50 years, she sold $5.83, which was near the low of the day. Send out the text alert. Bunch of people start blowing me up and they're like, oh, Ginger's going to die. Does she know anything about fundamentals? I was like, no, she doesn't know any of that. She's just reading price action. And the market closes 5 higher. So she's already in a loser. And then it goes up 5 in the overnight. And, I went to bed thinking we're going to die as a company. This thing's going at $8 and everyone's going to think Ginger's stupid. And I woke up and the next morning it's 40 lower.
Yeah.
And then the next day it's 20 lower.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I share that story is Ginger does things because she's predictive, right? She's not always right because she's trying to predict the future.
Sure.
But much like GPS with that ETA of showing up, it's the same type of thing. When I asked Jefferson, I said, what makes you think you can do this better than me? And I've been doing this 20 years. He goes, algorithms exist in every area of your life. They're just packaged in different products. And I was like, oh. And so now people are starting to understand that, if, you say a word to your friend, then all of a sudden ads in your social media start popping up for whatever you're talking about. And just try it sometimes. You'll be surprised. And so people are starting to get what an algorithm is and how they work. But where the next level of this is this AI component. We hear it all the time now. Nobody knew what we were doing 2.5 years ago. But now because of the AI is literally that's all anyone talks about. What it is called unsupervised machine learning. And it's teaching itself based on the information it's getting to adjust. And so this is a really complex architecture. I couldn't build any of this. I'm probably not explaining it correctly anyway, so don't even listen to me. But it's fascinating, right? It's fascinating to understand how a machine can understand data. And the sheer compute power of these things is so unbelievable. And you see it all over your farm, right? You're using algorithms all over the place on your equipment, sure. All kinds of things. You just don't realize it. And I didn't realize it either. He's like, well, do you use GPS? I said, yeah, of course. He goes, you know how that works? I'm like, no, I think there's a little guy in my car and he's reading the speedometer and knows the distance and therefore it's going to be this time. He's like, no, it's a magnetic grid of data points. And it's just calculating all these things. That's why I don't even speed anymore. You think Des Moines to Omaha is 2 hours. You go 90 miles an hour, duck all the cops, and you think you're going to get there 20 minutes early. Except you can't beat the ETA unless you're in South Dakota, where there's literally no people and you can go 140 miles an hour. I never do that, by the way. But if there's law enforcement listening, sure. But the idea of the precision, right? And so we're trying to refine it. We've been at it 2 years. Ginger made 6 sales last year in corn. Her highest sale was $5.97. Her average price was $5.67. In beans, she did even better. She had 6 sales. She sold $14.23 on December 30th, and she also sold $14.23. She sold the same price again, which I thought was interesting, in July or whenever that rally was.
Right.
Her average sale price on 6 shots is $13.91.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
And so, the high of the year was like 14.30.
Yeah.
Maybe 14.29. And so, not that it's perfect, and it's an unbiased data point, right? So it can take some of that emotion out of it. It doesn't care what anyone thinks. It doesn't care what I think. I bought soybeans yesterday, and I think soybeans could go to zero.
Yeah.
Right? If you get rain in Brazil and all these things that we've been talking about in this narrative, without some other catalyst, I don't see how markets are going to go much higher in 24. Now, certainly we still have a whole growing season. I always hear the story, the high isn't made in January, and that's typically true. But we don't usually start out at $5.
Yeah.
Right? And $13. And now we're down at $12.20. I looked this morning in beans, and that kind of sucks. It's like, well, if I'd known that, I would have sold $13.
Yeah.
Except if the market rallies and goes back to $13, now I want to sell 14.
Yeah, sure.
And that's where that's where the emotion, that's where it becomes so emotional. We have about a 94% renewal rate, and we had a couple. So everybody that non-renews, I call. I just want to find out, what was your experience with our product? What can we do better? What are you really looking for? And one guy said, I just want to farm. I don't even want to look at markets. I feel like I look at markets now more than ever. I said, well, did you make money with Ginger? And he's like, yeah. He goes, I just want to farm, and I want something to do it for me.
Yeah.
And I said, I get that, but you got to take personal accountability. And I didn't know how old he was. Excuse me. And I said, okay, you're 1,000-acre, 1,500-acre farmer, irrigated, and I said, well, do you have any kids? He goes, yeah, I got 3. I said, do you want to give them the same opportunity you got from your dad? He goes, yeah. I said, okay, well, you got to think about it this way. If you got 1,500 acres, each kid's going to get 500. Or you got to grow to 4,500 acres. And that's the nature of the beast right now.
Sure.
And the big guys are getting bigger and the small guys are getting squeezed. And so the small guys got to do something different.
Yeah.
A lot of the big guys have adopted all kinds of these things.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud of this. 20% of our agents grow 30,000 bushels or less. And I never thought somebody at, our price point, $2,000 a year, would pay for our product. And it dawned on me, and he shared this with me. He said, at 30,000 bushels, I don't have any margin for error. So I need the best tools I can get. This is just another tool in the toolbox.
Right.
Right? And he sold $5.97 corn last year on his 30,000 bushels. Or he could have waited, and he'd be selling $4.77 today.
Yeah.
Well, that $1.20 on 30,000 bushels is $40,000.
Sure. That's his income for the year.
Exactly. And so that's where whether or not Go Farm Yourself does this, I'm not really aware of any competitors we have right now. Somebody will do this, and other people will do this. And down the road, will be how it's done. The beauty of what I'm doing right now, where I'm trying to level the playing field, the reason why it's GFY.ag, it's the ultimate FU to an industry that told me to F off. And everybody in Chicago has these things. They have better ones than we do.
Right.
But one of the reasons we're able to reverse engineer what's going on is because they're all programmed with the same type of thing. And so we're just searching and doing research, trying to figure out what it is they're looking at to identify the tells in the market. The old way was you'd see the broker walk in, his clerk's falling behind him, he's sweating, and he's a little nervous because he's about to fill a huge order. Well, you'd know to get out of the way of that because I could see it. Now you can't do any of that.
Yeah.
You have no idea what's happening.
Right.
The market could be, we see it all the time at night. Beans will go up 10, 15 cents on light volume, and then the minute the regular hours open, it's back to unchanged.
Yeah.
Well, why'd you move 15 cents? And so that's where the price, by following price and the emotion that comes with that, becomes very hard to make decisions, right? So if you have important areas in the market and you want to make a target sale here because it's profitable, the challenge with it is you got to understand that even if you don't hit the high tick, if you're going to keep farming, you want the prices to go up for forever. So what you need to make sure is you're farming to make money and stay in business. Your job is to take this seed, put it in the ground, cultivate it, make it grow, harvest it, and then turn those gold nuggets into cash.
Right.
But a lot of times we want to store it in a cauldron and wait for that day in the future.
That may or may not even come.
Exactly. And so that's why I always say it's like you guys are modern day leprechauns.
Yeah.
Which I think is really cool, by the way. I've got this big cauldron of gold and I just stare at it. And one of these days it's going to go up $1 and I'm rich.
Yeah.
And then these wheat guys do this all the time. And no offense to the wheat guys, they just have a different mindset. And I guess if you just grow wheat, that's just your thing. And one guy calls me and he's like, well, I always saw the grain in the bin as my bank account. As long as I had it, I had money. And I said, so when do you sell? And he said, well, I sell when I need money. And I'm like, okay, but did you sell any at $13, 2 years ago in that big run up? He goes, no. What if it went to 20? What do I do now? I'm like, well, sell it. It's $8. Nah, I could have sold 13. And he said, but it's really interesting. I like your product. And what do you think about China? And then we want to talk about politics and all these other things. But this is what I'll leave you with. The market's job is to inflict the maximum pain on the weakest hands at all times. and it does that way faster and way sharper than it's ever been before. Whether you're a grower, you're a speculator, you're a trader, whatever, that's what it does. So if you're on the right side of that, it's really good, and if you're on the wrong side, it's really bad.
Right. We talk about it on here all the time, how much value we put in taking the emotion out of grain market and either using a service like Rupert is providing here, or, I mean, if you're not going to use Rupert's service, at least use some type of person that has a knowledge of trading, and that way you can have help with that, and it helps it helps your business grow, because it does take some of the emotion. I mean, you're never going to take all the emotion out of it.
Sure.
But if you have a professional doing it for you, or a service doing it for you, it does remove some of that emotion and allows you to see what makes you profitable versus, what leaves you floundering around just hoping to make a payment on that farm that you bought.
Right.
So if you enjoyed today's show and you'd like to work with Rupert, tell us how do we find you?
So you can go to our website, gfy.ag. Go to gfy.ag. Think gofarmyourself.ag. Don't go to .com, gfy.ag. You are in agriculture. You can find us on Twitter at GFY_ag. The Canadians like to send smoke signals. You can send us an email. We're on all the socials. You can call our main number, which is on our website. I really have enjoyed this, and the goal is to bridge the gap between rural and city. I mean, we just don't have an interaction because we don't have any experience with it, and then that lack of understanding is where the fear of each side starts coming in, and we need to start bridging that gap.
We'd love to have Rupert on again. We've enjoyed listening to what you had to say, and it's exciting to hear that there is people out there addressing the issues that we're facing in agriculture. And we appreciate your time today, Rupert, and look forward to having you again.
Thanks for having me. I'd love to.
Okay. Appreciate you listening to our podcast. If you enjoyed today listening to Rupert, go find him and look him up and check out his service. And we appreciate you as a listener. Like, share, and subscribe, please.